Leopold? He made the announcement basically, or he told me that any movement, any creaks, we have to be very shushy about. Is everybody okay on batteries, those who are not hardwired? Bo, you're doing okay on batteries? Okay. We got some minutes on the tape. How's everybody doing on tape? What are you in up there, Rick? A couple minutes?
Of the theatre obeys the dictates of common pattern. Morals on the stage are always distorted. Vice is allied with virtue, as to appear a younger sister, never permitting suspicion. The monster is actually seated within the heart. Richmond. Afflicted Richmond. You have resolved all your theaters shall go dark. Their stages bare of any action for the following 4 months. Like the bones of a carcass kept clean of its meat. Performance of no shape shall be permitted to approach her. And may this city have the grace to protract that period even farther and farther.
Scenes. Purple sunsets, the skies painted with whitest clouds, and nightscapes, the canvas scattered with stars, snow-capped mountains, rolling oceans, on and on and on. There was a tapestry for every time of day, every season, every corner of the world. 35 scenes. All of them suspended over the actors' heads, hanging by hempen, not much else. After an evening's performance, walking backstage, I'd catch myself listening to the fibers flexing themselves under the backdrop's weight. Each rope makes this twisting sound, all high-pitched and leathery, sounds like sails billowing in the wind. Each backdrop shifting with the current, drifting with the wind. This theater's nothing but a schooner built in with 35 different sails, each one an expansive canvas set in a different piece of scenery. It was my job to hoist up the sails, manning the mast backstage until the order was called out to raise the sky, raise the sunset, raise the mountains. My hands have scars to prove it. Palms have nearly been burned through. It takes me an hour after every show just to pick the splinters out of each wrist, wrapping the end of these ropes around my arms just to keep my grip. The curtain opens up and the command goes out. The actors step on stage looking out into that audience, nothing but an ocean of rolling heads. We set sail every evening.
There are parts men are destined to play. Hamlet for one. I remember my first encounter with the role, portraying the Prince of Denmark for over 70 consecutive performances. Our production toured throughout the southeastern region of the United States. I inhabited the role within a completely different theater every evening. Knoxville, Tennessee, Atlanta, Georgia. Night after night, I took to the stage only for the very spirit of Shakespeare to enter my body, possessing this vessel for the duration of the performance. I channeled his immortal words, as if I was speaking them for the very first time. Critics agreed. The reviews said just as much, expressing their admiration at my ability to make the lines crackle. If there had been a pail of water at my side, one columnist reported, I would have tossed it upon Mr. Robinson, hoping to extinguish his infernal interpretation of the bard. It is the legacy of the line that I most admire. What's written will be read, what is published will be performed for an eternity. These lines will be repeated by hundreds upon hundreds of actors, but how that one performer chooses to speak them will be his mark on the road. The next ends up adding something completely different, and so on and so forth. But I will admit this much. Never in my life have I spoke such words up on stage with such conviction, such sincerity as the house is on fire. And the curtain that closed on me that evening was in flames.
It was from the first act. There's a chandelier hangs above the stage, hangs from the ceiling, illuminates the whole stage. It looks intimate enough. It's the last scene before intermission, so when the curtain falls, I'm supposed to wait for the order to hoist the chandelier up, lifting the lamp back with the rest of the tapestries. Raise up the chandelier. Who said it? I can't say. My back was turned and I heard his voice clear enough, as clear as I hear my own talking to you right now. Raise up the chandelier. Raise up the chandelier. I'm not deaf. Certainly not dumb. Orders are orders and I do as I'm told. If I were to point fingers, I'd aim mine at the property man right between the eyes.
It was during the intermission when I noticed the glow. A strange flicker of light that I couldn't account for. Looking up, I immediately saw it amongst all the other backgrounds. That flush of orange and yellow casting a shadow over the ropes. The stage hand had raised the steam before extinguishing the candle. Lower that lamp and blow it out 3 times. I said it repeatedly. Lower that lamp and blow it out. Lower that lamp and blow it out.
There were about 3 minutes before the second act was to start, so I told the carpenter to extinguish it.
Well, that lamp was up high. Made it difficult for me to see which rope it was tied to. Had to unfasten a few before finding the right one. That candle cast these shadows clear across the cables, making it look like one big knot up there. All the cords moving, tangling up into each other. So I gave a good yank on the pulley.
2 cords worked over 2 pulleys. The roof had a collar beam attached to the ceiling, the lamp hanging down by about 14 feet.
The ropes had gotten all twisted into itself. So I gave a good yank on the pulley.
Whoever handled the chandelier had done a poor job. I found myself backstage, attempting to move it, only for the rope to catch on a separate set piece, spinning it a bit before settling back down.
I gave a good yank on the pulley. Only the lamp shook. Started rocking just a bit. A few inches back and forth like that. Had to raise it up again just to bring it back down. Only it jerked. This time it jostled. That lamp swerved from its upright position, dragging that candle clear across the lower corner of the neighboring backdrop.
All that varnish, all that lacquer.
The scene went up in a second.
In a heartbeat, whoosh!
Barely even a
There was
breath.
the morning sky. The tapestry that caught on fire was a painting of the morning sky. Just at sunrise, a daybreak only a moment away.
The flame rose, grew and grew, tapering off to a sharp point. It reached the roof.
Couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 feet.
6 feet, maybe 7.
More like 7.
6.
7.
All those scenes, lacquered up and varnished, might as well have been painted with kerosene.
Skies, sunsets, daybreaks, rolling oceans, street fronts, mountains, houses, living rooms, churches, cliff tops, rooftops, starry skies, clouds, snow. Lightning bolts, tidal waves, temples, bedrooms, cities. 50 stages.
35 tapestries.
All on fire now.
All hanging over the stage, all hiding behind the proscenium. The second act had started, the audience wrapped up in the show, while welling up over their heads, the fire mounted, grew along the roof, the flames extending their way towards the house.
That actor up on stage took one look up, lifting his eyes towards the ceiling, only to turn back to the audience and say, The house is on fire.
Only no one in the audience believed him.
How bad of an actor can you be that you can yell fire in a crowded theater and still nobody believes you?
He received a standing ovation that night. Everyone in the audience leapt to their feet the second they saw the fire falling from the ceiling, scattering across the stage.
He brought the house down.
Damn seats. They're uncomfortable as hell. After an hour of sitting in them, your back's practically bent in half. You leave the theater feeling like a hunchback. The armrests are wood. The rest, cast iron. Make one move during the show just to adjust yourself, and your seat sends out the most ear-piercing screech. Sounds like a cat on fire caterwauling to death. I can't even concentrate on the show. I'll spend the entire night searching for that one comfortable position, shifting back and forth. I'll slip forward for 5 minutes until I've lost the feeling in my legs. I'll pull myself up until my tailbone is rubbing against the back, my rump all numb. Lean to the left, lean to the right, my seat squeaking and shrieking, everyone's heads turning towards me. Our strength is in our numbers, people. The audience can't complain if we shuffle all at once. Not a soul can be singled out when we budge as brothers united. All together now. Shift. On my mark, move. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3! Find that comfort wherever you can, whatever it takes to make the play more bearable.
These were the best seats in the house. Front and center, just a few rows back from the orchestra. There was a perfect view of the entire stage. Less heads to look over. The balcony was well behind us. It was as if this show were being performed solely for my family and I. The rest of the audience might as well have melted away from my mind's eye, left with this flawless landscape of the stage. If you could understand the amount of trouble I went to simply to obtain these seats, you'd appreciate my patience. My wife had been begging me to take her to the theater for months. I rarely heard the end of it. Our anniversary was well on its way, and so I figured this would be the most appropriate present to commemorate our marriage with. I kept it a secret for weeks. It was perfect. Couldn't have planned a better present. I'd even gone to the lengths of blindfolding my wife, escorting her to her chair with the aid of my daughter's arm. The two of us sat at her side, each taking an ear, whispering hints of where we could possibly be. Every sound made her bristle with this inquisitiveness. The rustling of the playbills, the murmur of the audience. She hadn't a clue.
Is it dinner?
No.
Is it a concert?
No.
Where are we then?
Patience, my dear. Patience. Removing the blindfold was just about the most wonderful part of the evening for me. Watching her eyes come into focus, taking in the stage, and then flaring up. My God, her eyes lit up like oil lamps falling to the floor, the kerosene bursting over the ground. I'd never seen anything so beautiful. She could barely contain herself. And the kiss she gave me in front of everyone else in that audience, before the entire house, the balcony, the boxes. Oh, I can tell you now, it may as well have been the two of us on that stage performing our own play. Everyone in the house began to cheer. Before the show even started, the two of us received our very own standing ovation. When the cry was made that there was a fire, sure enough, not 2 breaths later, I could see flames enveloping the proceedings, spreading along the edge of the stage. My wife reached for my arm, squeezing, but I insisted that we stay in place. Patience, I said. It would be more prudent to sit still, to wait while everyone else hurried for the exits. The couple next to us had to extend their legs over our own, scurrying for the aisles, but I insisted to my wife and daughter that we stay in place. Patience, I said. Knowing quite well that we'd be crammed in with everyone else from the house, pushed and prodded along like cattle, knowing quite well that there'd be little chance of the 3 of us staying together battling the corralling crowd, knowing quite well that when we entered the stream of people forcing their way through the aisles, there'd be no hope of me keeping my grip on my wife's hand and her holding on to our daughter. Patience, I said. Sit here and wait. We did. Watching the fire spread, suddenly surrounding us. As if this were the show I paid for. As if this were what we'd come to watch. If I had taken the time to realize why I insisted so heartily that we stay in our seats, while everyone else hurried for the exits, yelling and screaming as they went, to recognize my intentions for what they were, what part of me had been so stubborn. I might have been able to admit to myself that it was for the view, for the intimacy of it all. Front and center, just a few rows back from the orchestra. Don't you see? These were the best seats in the house. The curtain had been dropped in hopes of warding off the flames. Through the thick partition, I could see a very large, bright light mounting its intensity, glowing, and then the flames ate through.
Whatever you do, honey, don't let go of my hand.
Don't take too much to follow the fresh air. Where may we find
You don't see the way.
Have you seen your sister? Have you seen your little brother?
Have you seen your mother?
Stay back.
Don't.
Wait until I come back.
Are you returning right away?
Head low, honey.
If your eyes keep moving, look down, don't look at the floor.
Keep up and stop all
Get
the
off
time.
my feet, sweetie. You don't have much
If
time.
your eyes keep staying closed,
It's just getting in your eyes.
I give you pity that thought if the smoke wasn't rising.
have your head and now it's the whole way out.
Can you hear me, honey?
Can you see?
Whatever you do, honey, don't let go of my hand. I want you to follow the fresh
Let
air.
the lungs sneak away.
Have you seen your brother? Stay right there. I'll be returning right away. Keep up and stop all the time. Just get in your eyes. Don't hear me, honey. Whatever you do, don't let go of my hand.
My mother sat behind me in the mirror for hours, preparing my hair for our evening out. She'd taken a cup full of sugar that afternoon, boiling it in barley, so she could then dip my curls in the substance, soaking my hair in it, combing its thick consistency through and through. When the sugar solidified, so would my curls, keeping my curls perfectly intact throughout the entire night. That's why, when the fire spread over my body, devouring my head in flames, my curls crisped, crackled even. The slightest scent of sweetness spreading with the cinders of my scalp.
I was bored. I kept kicking the seat in front of me. Some man sitting there, he turned around and glared. Couldn't help but snicker a bit. My mom took me by the hand, nearly dinked my arm out of the socket, pulled me up from my seat, dragged me down the aisle. Got my whipping in the lobby. bent me right over her knee, spanked me right in front of the ushers. Never felt more embarrassed in all my life. Then the doors parted open. The audience was charging through. It looked like a dam had burst. The water washing right over my mother and I, and nobody stopped long enough to realize we were right there in front of them. Nobody leaned over to try to pick us up off the floor. What it must have felt like to step on some little boy's bony frame, the snap of his ribs resonating through their shoe. What that softness must have felt like from under their foot, realizing that they just trampled over me. If they even realized it at all.
I only let go of your hand for a moment, long enough to fix my dress. It had gotten all ruffled, bunching up at my feet. I kept stepping on the hem. The crowd behind me continued to trot on the back end, throwing me backwards with every step forward. I figured if I could just grip the fringe with my hand, lifting the hem up to my knee, I'd be able to run faster. Keep up with you. You made this dress for me. Taking my measurements, you asked me to hold still and hold my arms out at my shoulders. Well, I imagined myself to be a bird, flapping its wings. You asked me to stop shifting, keep my knees together. Well, I imagined myself to be a pony, whinnying up onto its hind legs. Well, you finally gave up, throwing your own hands in the air.
Well, if this dress ends up being too big for you, you'll simply have to grow into it.
Never had the chance.
The floor had gone soft. The smoke had grown so thick inside the hallway I couldn't see 6 inches in front of me, let alone where I was stepping. I acted upon the blind faith of 1 foot in front of the other, over and over again, just like that prey I'd find the hard floor again. It took all of my energy to force my way through the crowd just to reach the street outside. I stepped over the people in front of me, climbing over their heads. I pushed so hard, forgetting that these were people, trampling over their bodies without even considering helping them get back up. The smoke made it easy enough. There was nothing to see. There was just their physical presence, the touch, and not much else. 1 foot in front of the other, as simple as that. There was smoke in my lungs. Everyone around me was sinking, falling to the floor while I kept climbing higher, reaching for anything that would advance me ahead of the rest. Everyone was extending their hands for me to grab them and pull them up from the floor. I discovered that the persons blockading the exits were principally ladies crying for relief. They entreated the crowd not to hurt them, beseeching so loudly it became a chorus. It sounded like a song. Those who escaped, myself included, did so at the expense of others. I found freedom on the bodies of others too weak to find it first. You must understand. I had to find my daughter. We had become separated in the lobby. Once I had made my way outside, it struck me the canvas was still trapped somewhere inside. I had to turn and force my way through the burning doors, past all the people piling up around the exits. It was like turning the tides, like some salmon working its way upstream. I wasn't nearly as fortunate the second time around.
Who missed the musicians? If fire had scorched the orchestra, burning every member of the band, I'm curious who mourned the loss of them. Not many. Every night it's the same thing. Somebody's always waiting around backstage trying to get an autograph from one of the actors. But us musicians, we can move freely amongst the audience, like ghosts walking amongst the living. It's because we're buried down here, in this pit, where no one can see us. Save for the folks sitting in the box seats, we're invisible. I've had little children spit at me from the box seats just above my head. This drizzle of saliva getting the sheet music all wet in the middle of the show. The pages will stick together, making it nearly impossible for me to turn them in time to keep up with the music. Thank God smoke rises. If I had been up there in the house, I would have choked to death with the rest of them. The stage became a funeral pyre. My sheet music was burning, curling up into ash. Sitting in the pit by myself, I just watched the flames eat right through the pages, spreading through the measures. It was as if the flames were reading the music now, note by note. The rest of the orchestra had run, dropping their instruments to the floor, leaving their music behind. The flames took to their instruments instantly, seized them in a second. Flames snaked inside each woodwind, tunneling through the flue. A flash of fire flaring out from the finger holes. When it came upon the string section, the flames reached to the harp first. A wave of flames wrapping itself around each wire, plucking each string until they snapped, one after the other. Pling, pling, pling. Oh, the brass held its own. Each horn heated up like a frying pan on the stove. I had reached for my horn only to burn my hand. Cinched the skin right off the ball, see? I'll tell you this now, it seems so strange, but it was as if the fire itself were playing the music now. And that's why I stayed. I wanted to listen, hear how the flames played.
The third floorboard from the rear of stage right creaks whenever you step on it. The pressure of an actor's foot makes the wood warp, sending this squeal into the air. You think about how it happened, how many steps it took to wear down the wood, how many actors it has taken to stand in that one particular spot over and over again. How I prepare for an evening's performance is to make my way on stage before the house opens, simply walk about the theater, acquainting myself with every creak, every weak spot within the wood. I want to know where to step and where not to. I want to hear the stage. The two of us communicating amongst ourselves until I am well aware of every creak, every fragile gap, every loose floorboard. You imagine every actor that has come before you. You imagine the roles that they have played, the very lines that they have delivered, and you imagine them as ghosts now come and gone. I come here before the house opens so that I can hear them. I prepare for my part by listening to the ghosts of those roles performed before me. They're in the wood, in the stage, in the proscenium. They're everywhere. They'll be here long after we are all gone. I can tell you that.
Take the most succulent desserts you've ever tasted. Conjure it up in your memory if you can. Decadently dark chocolate mousse, topped off with a white fudge flour. Bittersweet coffee pudding, sprinkled in chocolate dust. A pecan tart, caramelized in brown sugar. Apple dumplings, covered in a white peach puree. I tell you this now, none of them compare to the taste of that first breath of delicious air I took into my lungs upon escaping that building.
The members of the audience sitting in the box seats couldn't escape from the stairwell anymore. The fire having overwhelmed the hallway. I watched a man take his wife's hand into his own and leap off from the balcony. Landed right in the percussion section. Their fall, cushioned by the kettle drum, made the most resounding impact I've ever heard. Another couple followed them down, hurtling themselves off the balcony and into the pit. Before long, there was a heap of people in the orchestra. None of them able to get up. Their legs broken, their backs snapped. Buried below these bodies, at the very bottom of this heap, you'll find our instruments. You'll find a French horn, its funnel crushed under the weight of some woman's fall. Its valves collapsed, its brass covered in soot. This is my instrument. This is how the fire had a harmony of its own.
Somewhere within the rafters of the stage, a pigeon had built its nest. Lord knows how long ago, long enough to raise a family. Could have been there for years. It wasn't until I was outside, watching the fire devour the theater, when I noticed higher up, just above the building, a pair of flaming wings taking to the sky. And then another, and another. That family of pigeons had been trapped inside, escaping through the receding roof, their bodies now burning. They flew through the air as far as their wings could carry them, only to give out suddenly, falling to the ground. One of them landed right at my feet. Smoke spiriting up from its chest, the feathers had been burned completely off. What was left behind was nothing but a bony frame, like an umbrella without its webbing.
There's this ghost story my mom always told us kids before we'd slip off to sleep. She'd come over on a slave ship when she was just a little thing, no older than 16. Just her and her older sister crammed in those quarters with over 100 others. Said there wasn't enough space for people to even sit down, much less sleep. Two of them would have to take turns. One of them would sleep for a few hours, resting her head on the other shoulder, only to wake up, trade places just back and forth like that, growing weak in the knees from standing all the time. Ma's sister was pregnant, see, had been for months. Her belly swelled on board that boat, ready to let her baby go. It wasn't until one night when things were all stormy outside, the water all rocky, pitching that ship up and down, rain leaking in from above, water spitting in through the porthole, when all of a sudden, Ma's sister heads right into labor. She's given birth on her feet, surrounded by all those slaves. Started screaming and shouting, blood running down her legs, quivering in the knees. There wasn't any room for her. Nobody budged. She's begging for help, but there wasn't enough space for people to even breathe, let alone give birth to some baby, not in the middle of the ocean, not in the middle of some storm. Ma says she watched her sister get pushed towards the ship's side. Everyone just started grabbing her and dragging her away from Mom. So she watched her sister get lifted up over her head, and passing on the heads of everyone else, holding on to her baby, the whole belly, the whole time, only to get pushed through the porthole. Heard her scream as far as the ocean and sea just swallowed her up. Suddenly there was that much more room to breathe. Now, the way my mom tells it, though, that's where her story starts. Watching her sister get pushed through that porthole, dreaming about her giving birth out there in that ocean, holding on to her baby in the cold water, two of them drifting for an eternity. Out there. I couldn't help but start dreaming about her myself. Always saw Auntie in my sleep, slipping through my window, cradling that baby blue as that sea. Never leave me alone. When I heard that there was a fire down at the theater, I went, didn't even look where I was going, simply followed the flames. You can see it from all the way across town, lifting up into the sky. First thing I find when I get there are these women standing at the windows. Glass comes showering down, shadows across the street. I'm standing below only to watch these women leap, one after another. They get pushed by the people behind them, forced to fall. I see this one woman with her clothes on fire. She hits the ground. Ribs of her dress just about the only thing left of her, the rest in flames. I'd never seen anything like that before. Well, not in my life. Only in my dreams. For every woman that came falling out from that window, I'd stand below him, just holding out my arms like this, just catching them one by one. They say I saved 36 lives that night, just catching those folks getting shoved out from that window. But I tell you this, it seems like I saved only one. For every lady that came falling into my arms, all I saw was my mama's sister. Over and over again. My family came into this country with ghosts shackling our backs already. I don't need your ghosts haunting me to boot. Keep your own ghosts, why don't you?
598 people had funneled their way through those doors there. Well, nearly all the French had come to the theater that night.
518 of them were adults. 80 tickets were sold at reduced rate to children.
598. The human body holds about 350 bones at birth, only for a few of them to fuse together the farther into adulthood you go. Once you've reached your majority, your skeleton solidified itself into a slim 206 bones. So the older you get, the less of a skeleton you have. You actually lose around
144 bones.
So, let's estimate that those 80 tickets went to children with all 350 bones. 350 times 80 equals
28,000 bones.
So the children alone.
And take the 518 tickets bought at general admission and multiply that by 206, and you come out to somewhere around
106,708 bones.
For the adults alone.
That's what then?
134,708 bones,
all under one roof.
70 of those 598 perished in the fire. Of those 70, 50 were women, 20 were men. Men have one rib missing from the equation, pending your religious affiliations.
And the Lord God took one rib from Adam and closed the place up with flesh. And the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken from the man.
Carry the one rib over, add that to the women, and it balances itself at somewhere around
70,000 ribs.
Give or take.
Consider,
and that amounts to
10,300 bones.
All together,
17,300 bones.
all piled up in neat heaps. In the orchestra pit, in the aisle, at the exit, near the windows along the second floor.
Now you try telling me whose are whose.
Right here. Piled up right around a dozen high, there lay a mass of burned bodies. Bodies of all classes and conditions of people, young and old, men and women, bond and free, rich and poor. Some of them were burned so badly it was practically impossible to discern exactly who they were. Others were nearly uninjured, and yet life had just left their bodies, all cold and stiff.
This was the aisle, where it used to be. I can remember it as if it was still there, leading up to the exit. The aisle was narrow enough that two people could scarcely pass by one another at a time, funneling the audience through. We always had to hold the curtain by 5 minutes simply to seat everyone. The roof hadn't been blasted. It had a sheathing of pine planks covered with these flimsy shingles. When the fire was high enough to reach the roof, it all went up in seconds, burned right through. Those who survived looked up and said that they could see the stars in the sky. The entire ceiling completely missing, exposing the night, the evening in clear view, framed in flames. The staircase was just back there, leading to the lobby. The weight of the audience crowding onto the steps made it collapse. Over a dozen people falling into a heap of stairs. I built this theater. I headed the committee that constructed this building, setting the stage for the fire. People ask me if I ever felt guilty, if I felt responsible for those that died. The only answer I've ever given is in my actions. Shortly thereafter, I headed the committee that built the monumental church, constructing it right on top of where the theater had been. What more do you want from me?
Our houses have all become hospitals now. You wouldn't believe the number of people I've seen this week, easing their way into my office. Half the city has come to see me complaining about smoke inhalation. Peering down as many throats as I have, I swear I should have been in the chimney sweeping business. I could just as easily have been staring down these people's stovepipes. The singed nasal hair, the burns around the mouth, and all that ash lining up along the trachea. Everything's phlegmy this week. I've taken out a spittoon, setting it next to my desk. Before I even ask a patient to open up and say, I insist that they spit for me. If the saliva's gone gray, then I know for a fact that their lungs are full of fluid, which means I have to operate right away. If it's black, God help them, they'll be drowning in their sleep within a week. There are certain ironies to fire. I can think of two just off the top of my head. First, as babies, the lungs are meant to sound crepitant. Before your first breath, the tissues crackle. It sounds like a fire in your chest. Your first breath is a blaze of oxygen opening up the lungs. Second, this being the heart of the tobacco industry, we of the medical profession are privately aware of the dangers of inhaling cigar smoke. Smoking causes the exact amount of damage to the lungs as a fire would, simply extended over a considerably lengthy amount of time. Our bodies are our own little playhouses that we set ablaze, burning our insides out, one cigar at a time.
They buried all of those unknown bones in the orchestra pit. Instead of some cemetery, the city's making a grave out of the area where the walls of this theater once stood. Seems fitting.
We write these words to be eternal. Ever read the Dead play? There's nothing more dismal than a script that hasn't been performed in years. There's something musty to it. The words sound gummy to the tongue, congealed even. You can hear the cobwebs connecting the sentences together. Playwrights never die. Wish they would. Ghoulish, yes, but definitely not dead. Their hopes of eternity come at a price. Acting is a day you've got a chance for immortality. For every playwright that I've ever come into contact with, it is the same old argument. Here's my chance at making my mark. My work will live beyond me. My words will be uttered well past my life. You'd think they made a deal with the devil. That's what the Protestants would have you believe anyway. Ghouls. All of them. Every playwright that I ever met was one of the undead. Wandering around aimlessly backstage, shuffling their heels to find the next scrap of life to sink their mossy teeth into. You don't believe me? Try talking with one. See how well your conversation goes.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Bleeding Nun!
Where yon proud-tourted crown the rock, seest thou the warrior stand? He sighs to hear the castle clock say midnight is at hand.
It strikes, and now this lady fair comes flitting from her hall. Her heart is rent with deep despair and tears in torrents fall.
Oh, woe is me, my love.
She cried.
Anguish rends my heart. Oh, woe is me.
She said
We
inside.
must forever part.
Not so, my Agnes,
Raven cried.
for leave thee will I never, for thou art mine and I am thine, body and soul forever. Oft have you heard, old Eleanor, your nurse with horror tell, how robed in white and stained with gore appears a spectre fell, and each 5th year at dead of night stalks through the castle gate, which by ancient solemn right for her must open wait, soon as to some far distant land retires tomorrow's sun, with torch and dagger in her hand appears the Bleeding Nun. Now you shall play the Bleeding Nun, arrayed in robes so white, and at the solemn hour of 1 start forth to meet your knight.
For I am thine.
Fair Agnes
And
cried.
leave thee well
sat within her bower arrayed in rose so white, and waited the long-wished-for hour when she should meet her knight.
And Raymond, as the clock struck one before the castle stood, and soon came forth his lovely nun, her white robe stained with blood.
He bore her in his arms away, and placed her on his steed, and to the maid he thus did say, as on they rode with speed.
Hail, Agnes, Agnes, thou art mine, and leave thee will I never. For thou art mine, and I am thine, body and soul forever.
Oh, Raymond, Raymond, I am thine, and leave thee will I never. I am thine, and thou art mine, body and soul forever.
A whirling blast from off the stream threw back the maiden's veil. John Raymond gave a hideous scream, and then his spirits failed.
Then down his limbs in strange affright, cold dews to pour begun. No Agnes met his shuddering sight.
God, 'tis the bleeding nun.
A form of more than mortal size, all ghastly pale and dead, fixed on the night her livid eyes, and thus the spectre said,
Oh, Raymond, Raymond, I am thine, and leave thee will I never. I am thine, and thou art mine, body and soul forever. On stage, I was the bleeding nun. To the people of Richmond, I am the bleeding nun. My daughter had sat in one of the boxes along the balcony with the rest of the acting company's children and family, watching me perform on stage, only a few feet away. She knew the role just as well as I did, if not better. I had raised her playing that part. The other members of the company always teased her. Or was that me? Insisting that she should be my understudy. When the theater began to burn, I escaped through the backstage door, hoping I'd find my daughter on the other side of the building, waiting amongst all the other family members. It completely slipped my mind that I was still in costume. The entire front side of my dress drenched in stage blood. For every man and woman I ran up to in the street, they would only stare, shocked at the sight of me standing there covered in gore, begging them to help me find my daughter. Had they seen my daughter? Running up and down the block, frantically calling out her name, sifting through the growing crowd of onlookers. Charlotte! Charlotte? You didn't need to perish in that theater, to have died in the fire. I'm a ghost to these people. My occupation is gone. I dress in weeds. When it came time for the company to leave Richmond, I couldn't bring myself to abandon my only child. And now, when I walk down the street, I can hear the children whispering behind my back.
That's the bleeding nun.
I can say this within private company. Heaven forbid if it were to be uttered elsewhere. The theater fire offered us an opportunity, and quite frankly, it kick-started the second great awakening. It was mobilizing. Inspiring, how about that? by all means feel sympathy towards those who perish, but may I remind you, as good Christians, we need to be an enemy of the theater. Look upon this fire as an act of God. If there were ever a finer example of hell on earth, I pray that it never befall us. The people of Richmond had to come neglect us, of God, plain and simple. The sins of the theater had taken grip, and God simply made his presence known. Look upon Job. By punishing him, God warned the rest of us. Job was an example set for everyone else. The hand of God can fall upon you or I at any given moment, just as it had with Job. What separated those who survived from those who died in the fire is simple. We now had a cause. We now had an example.
We held a contest. A commission of influential Richmonders organized a cordial competition between the Episcopalians and the Presbyterians to see who could raise the most money to build a new church on the scorched property. A subscription drive, if you will. What people of what faith would pledge the most money? The land would be given over to whichever faith reached the bid the quickest. The Episcopalians won.
How very little theater and the church agree with each other. People are not unconscious of such occurrences happening in the church. A similar fate has befallen the righteous as it did with those wicked theater goers. Roofs have collapsed on congregations. Floors have fallen away. But what has the righteous man to fear? He has devoted his services to God. Though the earth and all the works that are therein be burned up, he stands on the ashes of the universe and exclaims, I have lost nothing. The soul has nothing to fear. Prospect of eternity in heaven. Can the theater offer the same for its casualties?
Listen to these ministers mosquitoing scripture. They have sunk their tongues into the Bible and sucked up enough Testament to drain the Gospels dry. There isn't any holiness left. Thought I heard some buzzing about my ear. Listening to their sermons, I feel as if I should now be wary of malaria. They're preaching their own form of yellow fever. Congregations will soon be dropping dead from all this religious fervor. We'll all be swatting at gospels before long. Look at what they've done now. From the very ashes of the theater, a monumental church rose up. The Episcopalians built their new house of worship directly over the spot where the theater once stood, as a testament to their faith, as a way to strengthen their congregation, capitalizing on this act of God. Rushed right into building it too. The cinders had barely cooled. Sermons were heard coming from the pulpit as early as the following spring. One theater made way for another. From the ashes of one playhouse, we set the stage for a new one.
Ever seen someone on fire? they dance. Every limb waves through the air as if to rid themselves of the blaze, hoping to shake the flames away. And I'll tell you this now. The only other time that I have seen such fervor, such animation from the human body was in church. Yeah, the moment the Holy Spirit enters the body of a parishioner, they become agitated, unsettled. They dance. Personally, I never attended the theater all too often. It was a conflict of interest. But quite early on, I realized that there was something to be gained from the stage, something to reap. To better tend to my congregation, I learned how to act. And you could say that the theater held some sway over the church. Yeah, only mildly so, though, initially. We simply took the resources of the stage and used them for our own means to help us spread our message. And Richmond was ripe for it. Look at what the theater had done. These people were suffering. These people were mourning. And preaching requires a presence, a magnetic personality, the gestures, the control over the voice, proper volume and elocution, and that takes training. Talent is only the half of it. How you utilize those skills behind the pulpit is what really matters. So I studied. I learned from the greats, watching them perform. I learned every gesture, every gesticulation from the actor's bag of tricks. I learned the value of the dramatic pause. Vocal techniques, I learned that my body was a tool and that I could use it as such. I could have been a great actor. And for those 8 years following the fire, I was the only thespian to grace the stage here in Richmond. Was me. And I packed the house every Sunday.
It was blatant exploitation is what it was.
That is not the case at all.
You capitalized on our ashes.
Not true. Not true. We simply made use of the raw materials, the heat that was before us all. Someone had to say something. Somebody needed to make sense of it all. So we did. The church had been running in circles, chasing its own tail for years, losing more and more people to the theater every Sunday. Then the fire.
No, not then the fire.
Yes, the fire.
Don't chalk this up to an act of God.
Well, what would you call it then?
It was an accident.
There are no accidents.
It was an accident.
It was a calling.
It was a candle.
It was God in that flame.
You know what's so amazing about all of this? You're on stage too, just as much as any actor is.
Don't deny that, I never did.
Only you built yours on the bones of those who died.
You say that.
You stand on the stage criticizing theater like some hypocrite.
Have you ever been to one of my sermons?
Have you ever been to one of my shows?
I go to bed early on Saturdays.
Well, I sleep in on Sundays.
Theater of Venice was struck by lightning. 1769. Dozens were trampled to death. The Amsterdam Playhouse took fire. 1772. 7 people suffocated from smoke. Theater at Zaragoza. 1772. Nearly half the audience perished. Hallelujah! Burned to the ground. 1781. During the French opera, of all things. Theater at Montpellier. 1783. 500 lives were lost there. Theater at Mentz, 1786. The London Opera House, 1789. The Royal Circus, 1805. The Theater at Altona, 1807. The Theater at Berlin, 1808. All burned down. Hundreds of persons burned with them. And you ask me why I never go to the theater. People refuse to look back at their tragedies. They insist that for every current catastrophe, they were the first to experience it. History proves otherwise. Tragedy is nothing new. To you, or to the other hundreds of thousands of people who've experienced it. Try whining to the people who died in the fire at the Ricketts Circus in Philadelphia. The Pantheon. The Covent Garden. From this fire, the people of Richmond will weep. They will beseech God's goodwill to spare them such hardship. But I'll tell you this, you wait till the next generation comes. The same thing will happen to them, sure enough. And the next, and the next, and what none of them will ever realize is that it's happened all before. Particularly in Richmond. The city deserves to burn down.